Good evening.
Good evening.
Well, it's good you came to the last class because this is where I'm going to explain it. You will understand unobstructed. Before we get started, I meant to bring the URL or the specific thing to point you to. I can only give you a general pointing. Kogan had told me about, he came across something on YouTube. There's an Australian bhikshuni, Theravadan nun, who recites the Genjo Koan on top of some kind of soundscape. And he really liked it. And so I didn't listen to the whole thing. I started to listen to a little bit, and it sounded really good. But it was another opportunity for that kind of way to interact with the text that is not just reading and trying to understand, and but just listening to it. And you know how this particularly women Australian accent that is just really, I don't know, there's something about it. And she reads very slowly and meditatively. And so I think it's quite, maybe it's 20 minutes or something like that. Not like, we read in about 8 minutes or something like that. So it's a slower pace and you can kind of just drink it in. So I'm sure if you put in like nun reads Genjo Koan or Australian Genjo Koan or something like that in YouTube, it would come up. I recommend that. Particularly as we finish up with this series of talks. And, this is just the kind of starting point or a continuing point for your relationship with the Genjo Koan, the kind of things that I've been discussing over the past few weeks. Really, they're just kind of a drop in the water, a stone thrown in the water. And what your life has to do with those things and how it unfolds is really up to the relationship between you and Dogen continues to unfold from here. So all of those kinds of things are nice. I'm one of those people who falls asleep, like it's a gift and a curse, but like I just like pillow. I'm not bragging. Pillow, like head, I'm asleep. But I think it'd be a great thing to listen to, like when you're going to bed, just kind of listen to, and then you might have some trippy dreams. If you're lucky. Or some insightful dreams. That's the other word for trippy. So before I get started, kind of heading towards the end of the text today, I wanted to go back over a couple things before we get into this and kind of visit what I talked about in the first couple classes about this term, which is the title, but also is a very important term for Dogen, Genjo Koan. I mean, it's important enough that he named one of his most important writings. He titled it Genjo Koan. He also uses this term inside of his writing in Shogo Genzo in many places. Within this text, I pointed out a few places. Sometimes in English, it can be hard to catch because it doesn't have, depending on the structure of the sentence that it's in, if they just write Genjo Koan or actualization of the fundamental point or something like that, it doesn't make sense in English, or the language breaks down, the grammar breaks down. So keep your eye peeled for that. Oh, where do you think this might just be the word Genjo Koan? It's saying something about actualizing, about a fundamental point or something like that. In Okumura's translation, he uses that way. But when we were looking at different translations, like I said at the beginning, Genjo Koan is famously impossible to translate. So it can show up in all these places, and in English you don't really know. So pay attention to footnotes. Usually, if it's a good translation, a scholar that's done it will have pointed things out in the footnotes and will tell you it's Genjo Koan. They're being kind. So again, this term Genjo Koan, Nishihari Bokusan, who is one of the most revivalist of Soto Zen in the modern period, really powerful teacher. He was one of the heads of the school. He calls Genjo Koan, Dogen's words of iron. And this is a Zen phrase of, and I think, I'm not sure if it's Nichiren Goksan that says this or not, or if I just made it up. He says something like, it's a rod of iron that continues to turn, something like that. The idea being that it's a one single idea that is the same all the way through and permeates everything. It's not about a discursive analysis of something. It is just his expression of the direct actuality of awakening. And so in the Zen tradition, we say that a Zen teacher will have one phrase that they end up using that is like their words of iron. And Nichiren Goksan says that these are Dogen Zenjis. And he says that he sees straight through the world of the 10 directions as Genjo. He sees straight through the world of the 10 directions as Genjo. And he doesn't see through Genjo Koan. He doesn't understand Genjo Koan, therefore he can see through the thousands. His seeing through the 10,000 worlds clearly is what's called Genjo Koan. This is Nichiren Goksan, his commentary. So, as we study Genjo Koan, we're studying that eye of Dogen Zenji. We're studying his way of seeing. And just because we haven't talked about it all that much the past several weeks, this Genjo is just really hard to translate, but it's something like appearing, becoming, being. It's like what is, not in an abstract sense, very immediate sense. And that then koan, I've been using the term invitation, okay, or teaching. So we can understand Genjo Koan is a text about everything, whatever is present is an invitation, whatever is present is a teaching. And this is why Dogen Zenji sees through the 10,000 words as Genjo Koan, because whatever is appearing, becoming, being, whatever is present is that invitation. It is the teaching. It is, in another sense, the emptiness and form. Which I won't go into that again. If you go back and look at your notes, you'll see what we talked about. Ko as being like quality, undifferentiation, the principle, on as being about multiplicity, about being form, about being manifest, and that these really are totally indivisible. That's one way to understand where the term koan comes from. And in their indivisibility, they become a conundrum. That's why koans are a conundrum, or they're like, you can't get through them rationally. You have to accept them for what they are and teach, because emptiness and form are really irreconcilable because they're not separate. Okay, also talk about that. So this invitation to each moment, this is one way we can understand what Genjo Koan is about. Now, again, what Dogen does in this text and in many places over and over again is he will give us an image, he'll give us an idea, he'll give us some kind of a little map, and then he'll take it away. And in the taking away, he'll affirm what it was that he said in the first place. And we see that right from the beginning of the text, in those first three, which really are the Genjo Koan, and everything else we can say is kind of a commentary. Those first three where it says, when all dharmas are the Buddha Dharma, there's delusion, realization, practice, life, and death, Buddhas, living beings. See, there's all these things. That's how it is. You can see all of them, right? And then he says, when the 10,000 dharmas are without a self, then there's none of this. So he takes it away. Right? And then he gives it back. Since the Buddha way by nature goes beyond abundance and deficiency, there is a rising and perishing, etc. Right? And that pattern is something that not only Dogen Zenji utilizes, but Zen utilizes Buddhism utilizes Mahayana Buddhism all the way to the very roots of the oldest text, the Prajnaparamita in 8,000 lines. It's just riddled with this basic pattern of it is this, and so it isn't this, and so it is this. The great Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, late teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, he would say, it's the dialectics of prajna. That's what they call it. A rose is not a rose, therefore it is a rose. And he was presenting that as a central theme of the Mahayana. So this is exactly what Dogen also presents. But that kind of tidy presentation is also a map, which has to be taken away. that is a loop that we don't get to just perspective. It will on getting an image of a blender. We will fall into the blender if we're lucky. And that's really what it's meant to do. It's meant to be an invitation, just like a banana. So an example of this kind of comes to something that I've been talking about quite a bit in the past couple of weeks. I've been talking about the jeweled net of Indra, particularly as it relates to the Dharma position. So especially that section about wood and ashes and everything, which can just be so confusing, especially because it's about time, and we're not used to thinking of time in such a flexible way. We must have fairly rigid conception of time, although our experience of time is not very rigid, actually. If you kind of pay attention to that, that's really fun if you key into time in that way. Especially sitting, Have you ever just been sitting and just be like, if the bell doesn't ring, I'm gonna scream? It's only 40 minutes, man. What if you were watching like reruns of Three's Company or whatever? We'd probably just be screaming anyway. Like you're just like, whoo. But then you're sitting there and it's like all of a sudden the world's gonna end. Anybody, it goes the other way too. Sometimes you're sitting and you can't believe that it's like. I remember this one time. It was early on in the practice of Zen. It was really a gift and then a curse. I had this experience. I sat down for meditation, and it was at a temple nearby where I lived. Where during the Rohatsu week, they didn't have a session every evening. They had 3 periods of sunset. We drank tea. Go home. The last night we had soup and chat. It was really fun. But one night I sat down and they rang the bell. I was like, no. It was hanging with the gate. Beautiful temple. Gong. It was over. It was like the 4th bell. It was just like it was 3 bells, and then the ending bell was just like all one thing. And of course, I was very proud. I probably just was asleep in retrospect, but I thought that it was like this great thing. So that's another way you can experience time. Why did I start talking about that? Sorry. This will be the. Let's say Ejo's quality of teaching. Only distraction. Commitment to distraction. Okay. It was Dharma position. So I've been drawing this kind of, I'm not going to draw the jewels this time because it takes me a little while to surpass that. And we talked about this net in which every single thing on the net is reflecting everything else on the net. Right? That's a beautiful image. And that each one is a jewel. It's a multifaceted jewel, which can reflect every other jewel. And it's a net that's multidimensional. I'm drawing it 2-dimensional here, but it just spreads out through all types of space and time. And that the Dharma position, if we want to understand what Dharma position is about, it's saying that if we try to talk about how this thing is one with the other things, we lose its Dharma position. We can't actualize its Dharma position because we're always talking about it in this kind of relational way with other things. And we're talking about its temporary unfolding. We're talking about its mutuality in a sense that's just about how these things are co-created. But the Dharma position is referring to no, they're not one in the sense that they all kind of fit together to make a one. This particular thing reflects everything through all time and all space, and all possible time and all possible space. So don't try to stretch it out to cover other things. This thing is the whole net. Any node is the entire net. And because any node is the entire net, it takes a different way to think about practice than how to make our mind really, really big to be able to hold it. It's that we have to be able to see the Dharma position, or to see through the Dharma position. So this is the kind of teaching that Dogen is really famous for. He's really strict about this. Having said that, kind of a map, right? So this is conceptually is beautiful, and if we think about Dogen's presentation in the section about the moon reflected in the water, which I don't know about you, but always to me is kind of a favorite. I mean, how could it not be? It's like the moon is reflected even in a drop of water under your feet, and all this. It's just like so. It feels so like beautiful and supportive. Like you're really part of this, But it also is kind of this map, and then he goes right into okay, but if you want to practice this, if you want to walk this path, it's not going to seem like you're full. He's saying it's going to seem like something's missing, right? There's something lacking. And I had this dream this week. And I think it was about this net. And it was a very curious dream. I'm interested in dreams. And I had these coins. I had these Japanese coins, 50 yen coins and 5 yen coins. They're both coins that are like this with a round hole in the circle in the center. And in this dream, there was a lot that was going on. Let's tell you this part. I was dropping these coins into a pond. And as I was dropping them, they were turning into round stones. And they were falling in the pond. And then the pond, you know how it is. Dropping stones in ponds. It's a round pond. So this is also a drawing, in a way it's a map. But what is the vantage point? What is the nature of seeing? What is the quality of encountering the teaching of what is presently appearing as being? What would it mean to see as the Dharma position, from the Dharma position? If we shift from the kind of, it's like a net, to it's like they just circle upon circle upon circle, and any circle you see has an infinite amount of circles, or I don't know, infinite's the right word. It has all these circles that go in, it has all these circles that go out. And that's the nature of it. Actually, if we watch it just in a very mundane type of sense, we can see that our awareness, when we pay attention to something, there's an infinite amount of detail with which we could be interested in, and we could go inside, till you get an electron microscope deeper. And I think they have a better one than electron microscope now, but it goes even deeper. And then you can get all up to the Hubble telescope and then the telescope. And the same thing when you think about your consciousness, how you pay attention to your consciousness, it can do the same thing. So why am I telling you that? You look at my notes. So each thing you see has this quality, okay, whether you realize it or not. Okay, it has this quality, which we sometimes call emptiness, because whenever we look at one, say we're looking at this circle, and then all the ways that this circle goes in and becomes not the circle that we think it is, or it goes out and it becomes not the circle that we think it is, that can be really painful to us because we want the circle. Mm-hmm. Especially this cherry pie. I had cherry pies. I don't have any cherry pie anymore. But whatever it is, the classical teachings of Buddhism say that we grasp onto a certain level of that experience, to a certain facet of our experience. And in that grasping on, we're always then will experience some disappointment, some unease, because it will change, it will go away. And then the Buddha said something even more precise. He said, even in the grasping of it, we already will feel unsettled because we know it can't hold. What we think we're grasping, we know deeply is not what we're grasping. We know it doesn't have the capacity to hold up to our need or desire or want for it to fulfill us in the way that we need or want or desire to fulfill us. So we feel anxious even when we've got it, right? Just think about money. Has anyone felt like kind of, maybe you get a chunk of money and you feel relieved for a while, but then there's all the kind of problems that come with getting a chunk of money. Like maybe you won't have enough, or maybe you'll lose it, or whatever. So that's a kind of true with everything. So anyway, this kind of way we see the Dharma, this thing is not saying this is what enlightenment is, and then delusion looks like something else. It's saying this is how we're seeing all the time, and awakening to it and not awakening to it makes the difference. Mm-hmm.
Just briefly, can you talk about Dharma position in relation to negative experiences? Because it's kind of easier to think of it, of all things reflecting each other.
Mm-hmm.
This is sort of a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
But when something really awful is happening,
Yeah.
like someone's being hurt,
Yeah.
how, I mean, I guess it's all perception, but can you talk about that a little bit?
So the Dharma position, we say that any phenomena is reflecting everything, but that's a neutral state. Where karma comes in is, do we act in the divisive way, driven by greed, hate, and delusion, or do we act in the wholesome way which heads towards liberation, which is generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom? That wind will reverberate throughout all things. And so that's why the teaching of karma says that things don't just come from nowhere. It doesn't mean that something bad happens to you that you deserve. Sometimes people misunderstand that kind of side of the teaching of karma. But it says that there is a complex of causes and conditions which are reverberating through your life or through an individual's life. And that negativity is the basis for why there can be karma. Or I would say this reflection is why there is the basis for why there can be karma, because it reflects through in that way. So I think it can be overwhelming because we see like any instance of brutality is, in a way, all brutality. And so we're facing the fact of intense and immense brutality when we face any moment of brutality. So that can be really overwhelming. But we can also say addressing brutality in its way, whenever it appears to us, even if it appears to us as small, it's not small. And there's a real hope in that, because it means that when we address the negative things like brutality in a way that we can meet, it can have a real effect on the things that we think of as big brutality. Although nothing's really big or small, but that gives us a way to work with, and with negative emotions, for example, working on the instance of any negative emotion affects the whole, and so that's the positive side. But it also means any residual karma we can't escape, which is a little daunting. Is that
Yeah,
get
that's really helpful. It's
Yeah.
just, it's easier to even try to conceive of this when it's like, oh, it's a fish. A fish is beautiful. It's connected to all things. But then you think of terrible things that happen, and it's like, oh, that's also connected to all things. So how does that fit into the conception of what we're experiencing or what things are? Yeah. Because that becomes very real very quickly.
Yeah.
So that's helpful. Thank you.
So, okay, this was my theory. But then the question becomes, how do we live it out? And I think this is something. I think this is the reason that Dogen Zenji gives us a map and takes it away, and it gives us something back. It's always in that process, always inviting us into the blender. Which people have different constitutions, different, mental, emotional, spiritual constitutions, and so you find your own relationship with it. But it's always energizing in some way for things to continue to unfold, for a question to lead you as opposed to an answer. And I think that's one of the reasons I have affinity for Dogen's approach to practice, is that he won't really let things rest. He's that 3-part deal is going to go. He's going to give you something, take it away, give it back. Take it away. That relates back to one of the most famous stories of Zen schools. Goes back to the 6th ancestor. The 5th ancestor had a large. By the time of the 5th ancestor of Zen in China, the Zen had made its way into the monastic institutions and was quite strong. And the 5th ancestor was preparing to step aside from his duties and needed to choose a successor. And there was a large assembly of people there at the monastery, and he said, there's a wall. Apparently, you can go visit this wall. It's something I would like to do. It's still there. And he said, write your poem here of your understanding. Whoever has the best poem, they'll be the successor. So the person who everybody expected to be the successor, Jinshu, that's a Japanese pronunciation of his name. He wrote this poem. The body is the Bodhi tree. Mind is a clear mirror. Stand. Time and again, wipe it diligently. Don't let it gather. Very famous and very beautiful poem. This term mirror stand, it doesn't mean the stand for the mirror. It means I couldn't think of a better word for it. This is my transition. Like a mirror and a stand that's all together. Like you have a mirror in your room or something. You have a stand and a mirror. It's like a piece of furniture, a mirror stand. He's saying that the body is like the Bodhi tree and the mind is like this mirror stand. And we have to wipe again and again that mirror and don't let it gather dust, because it is the essence of our consciousness is a mirror, much like these circles and jewels that I can draw, right? It's just all total mirror. So this is a wonderful poem. Jinshu went on to succeed to his own school of Buddhism, his own Zen school, and it lasted for several generations, and then it's no longer extant. But the celebrated poem was the illiterate, not even monk, he was the dishwasher. At that time, they would sort of hire people into the monastery to do the dirty work, so to speak. And so oftentimes those people are really celebrated as being important. And then later on, that changed in the institution a lot, that everyone was supposed to do the dirty work later. Once the 6th ancestor won the contest, it's like everybody wanted to wash the dishes after that. And so he said to one of the monks who could write, he said, no. He said, what did he write? And he read it to him. He said, no, that's all wrong. Let me tell you this, and you write that up there. And then he wrote this poem, and then it said that he was acknowledged as the 6th ancestor. Enlightenment is not originally the true. The bright mirror has no state. Fundamentally, there is not even one thing. Where can this fall? So there's a lot written about this. I would say, from my standpoint, it's obvious that the 6th ancestor's poem is superior. That doesn't mean that this is an inferior or that this is a worthless poem. Right? But what makes the 6th ancestor's poem better? In a way, it's a little bit cheating, right? Because he gets to bounce off his poem, which is always a little bit one up. Like the person who goes first does not always have an advantage. I'm not sure in what games that's true. in this game. It's probably going first, it's not it. But what you can see is the mirror stand as if it was a thing, like the picture of a net of jewels or a circle. I've drawn a circle and said this is an image of a pawn dropping circles that are in circles into a circle that is just circles upon circles. So these are all kind of a mirror stand. They're all kind of an image. They're all kind of a thing which you can identify. And the sixth ancestor is saying the bright mirror has no stand. There's no edge. If you think about it in a literal sense, he's saying you can't identify the bright mirror in a place as a thing. It is fundamental to any perception that you have. It is not a piece of perception. It is consciousness. It's not like a thing that you could be conscious of. So if you have this idea like my practice is to keep this mind mirror clean, what mind mirror are you talking about? How could you even identify? What would you wipe it with that isn't the mirror? All of those kinds of questions. If everything is reflected in everything, if every phenomena completely interpenetrates every other phenomena, what is dust? Shards of mirrors. A mirror, the dust would just fall on the mirror, and it's just a mirror. It's all mirrors, or it's all just one mirror that doesn't have a stain. So anyway, I won't play with that for too much longer, but just to say, you can see the way in which this gives you a very clear idea about what practice is, a clear idea meaning a kind of conventional idea about practice. Keep wiping it. But then the sixth ancestor is saying, wait a minute. What is wiping? What does it mean to wipe it clean? It means to regard it in a totally different way than the idea that you could just keep dust away. Just trying to keep dust away is not actual cleaning. The actual cleaning of this mirror is to wake up to what the mirror is. And then there's no way for dust to fall on. So he's encouraging us. It's like it's more dynamic. It's more inviting, actually. This one, it seems like it's inviting because you're like, oh yeah, I'll just wipe that mirror. And then look at your hand, and your hand's a mirror too. You're like, how can I wipe it? So, beautiful vision, fish, water, birds, sky, living beings, practice enlightenment. Here in 11, Dogen gives us all of these kinds of beautiful images again. But then he says fish that want to swim, they have to make this their very place. They can't be out. They can't be out there trying to understand the edges of it, having a perfect image of it, understanding what it is. They actually have to make this place their very own. They have to make this path their own. In a way, you got to jump without knowing what you're getting into. And then your practice, your activity becomes Genjo Koan, he says. And I think I talked about that last week, but it's very clear that he says it becomes Genjo Koan. The practice activity becomes Genjo Koan when we don't wait to understand everything, but we practice it. Now, he refers to that as realizing one dharma is penetrating one dharma. Encountering one practice is practicing one practice. And I want you to pay attention to that because this is very central Dogen teaching. It says to realize one dharma is to penetrate one dharma. To encounter one practice is to practice one practice. Oftentimes you will hear this as like in different schools. To realize one dharma is to realize all dharmas. To encounter one practice is to practice all practices. Like in the Huayan teachings, they say one thought moment is 3,000 years. So a lot of times that's the way it goes. Like one thing. If you could see the one jewel, the dharma position of the one thing, then you see everything. But that's not what Dogen says. Dogen says you realize one dharma, you penetrate one dharma. But that penetrating one dharma is what it's about. It's not about getting rid of the one dharma so you can have all the dharmas. That one dharma is in itself what is to be penetrated. So I think one reason this is really important is it takes us out of the propensity for an abstraction, to start thinking of practice as being a movement from the actuality of what is here, Genjo, into my map or my idea. Although my maps and ideas are also actualities, what's right here. Now, part of the significance of this is it speaks about a freedom which is a freedom that is in limitation, not a freedom that is about overcoming limitation. So if we don't buy into something, if we don't pay attention to it, if we don't care for it, if we don't invest, then this penetration of one dharma doesn't become possible. We actually have to put something on the line for a specific thing. And we find that all over the place in our traditions, encouragement to practice. You're going to be cooking, and you're going to pay attention to what cooking is. You have to, what Dogen says, you have to discover, is the rice washing the water? Is the water washing the rice? Things like that. That's how much you have to be invested in this. And then, so I think that's about the summary of what we've talked about until now. Or almost done. But then he says this thing which we didn't talk about last week, which I think is really, this is so great. He says the boundary of the known is not clear. Again, this is him. It's part of his process of messing up the neat picture, the description of the fish and the birds and the water and the sky, living beings who practice realization. When he says, right after this part, when a person does practice enlightenment in the Buddha way, as the person realizes one dharma, the person permeates that dharma. As the person encounters one practice, the person practices that practice. There is a place in the path. So, and the boundary of the known is not clear. This is because the known is born in practice simultaneously with the complete penetration of the Buddha. We should not think that what we have attained is conceived by ourselves and known by our discriminating mind. Although complete enlightenment is immediately actualized, its intimacy is such that it does not necessarily become view. Viewing is not something fixed. So this viewing that we're talking about, this looking, this penetration of one dharma, the encountering one practice, the practicing one practice, the realizing one dharma, penetrating one dharma, is not doing something that we can know clearly. It's not like just heading towards a circumscribed goal. It's not like getting to know the thing, just deciding, okay, I'm going to really get to know this one thing. Penetrating one dharma is penetrating one dharma. And so I'm just going to pick this one dharma out and I'm just going to like go whole hog on this dharma and like forget all other dharmas. Because I have this goal of totally knowing this dharma. That's not what he's talking about. He's saying if we're really wholly engrossed in the practice of one dharma, then that one dharma can't be known. The boundary of what is that dharma or not that dharma is not clear. To really know something is not to be able to grasp it as a thing, right? As an object of our grasping. It's to practice it and to encounter it as this invitation, which is like, it's a gateway. It's just saying, come through. Previously in the text, he said things like something lacking. If you're really filled with the Dharma, it will feel like something's lacking, which first sounds like a disappointment and then sounds like hallelujah. If the bowl's never empty, they can't receive anything. Much better I was telling someone this earlier this week that Bodhidharma's famous saying is it's better to have nothing at all than to have something good. He's kind of a fanatic. But if you think about that phrase, it's beautiful though, because it's like part of it is if you never empty out, then how are you going to ever receive? When you have something good, you don't get to receive. You know? So it's not just, I mean, he's got that kind of real stern face and everything. So, but it's also very soft, like encouraging us to receive, get rid of what's good, or give it away, actually, you know, and then you can receive something. And so that lacking, that it not being clear is not a problem. It's actually the requirement for intimacy. The ocean appears as a circle. It has inexhaustible characteristics, but it appears to us as a circle. We can only see as far as our eye of study and practice can see. So these are other places where he's talked about the same principle of it not being clear, but that being a mark of what practice is about. And then, this is maybe, I know I've told you a bunch of these are my favorite lines, but tonight this is my favorite. You ever people ask you what your favorite food is, and then you say the one that's in my mouth? So maybe it's one of those. He says, although complete enlightenment is immediately actualized, this line right here, its intimacy is such that it does not necessarily become it. Now, again, for linguistic reasons, its intimacy is the way that this kind of has to get translated. But that intimacy is an interesting, word. This, by the way, was when I was leaving Japan. I asked my teacher to write a character poem. So if you're ever in my office and you see there's some calligraphies on the side of those central things. One side is this character, Mitsu, which we usually translate as intimate, and the other side is Raku, which means joy. That was another important teacher to me who gave that calligraphy. But this intimacy here, Mitsu, is the Japanese form. Here he just says intimacy, but this character means intimate. In here, intimate is like, my teacher first told me what is intimate. There's no gap. Everything's completely pressed up against each other. And we get confused about that because we have space. And in space, we think that there's a separation between things. But space isn't actually separation between things. That's just our idea about it. Actually, everything is completely continuous. And space is just the expression of the common. He says something like that, very mysterious, but it seemed right. So that's the intimate. It's not like emotional intimacy. Although emotional intimacy can also be intimacy, but it's not defined by emotional intimacy. It is that total interpenetration of things that he's been talking about all along. But that's not the only character he uses. He also uses this character, which means to be. So, although the way that we read this line is intimacy is such that it does not necessarily become viewed, its intimacy is such. That linguistic expression sounds just like intimacy is just kind of the quality of the complete enlightenment. But this in the Japanese could be read a slightly different way, is just the intimacy of being is such that it does not necessarily become viewed. And that all things, the original principle of all things, this is one of the commentaries, Kyogo, was one of the very early commentaries on this. He says the original principle of each and every being is this intimacy, this intimate being. That's what it is to be a phenomenon, to be a being. And again, in Dogen's world, in our world of being, we don't just think of like animate things as being, living beings, stones, all kinds of things. So every living being, its original principle is this intimacy. It can't be created. It's just simply what is there. And he says that this is not fixed. Viewing itself is not something fixed. The intimacy of our consciousness, which is a perpetual view, right, is not something fixed. We can't just nail it down. So sometimes I think about this, like people have seen the Vanderbilt set, those what's it?
Fractals.
Fractals. Yeah. So we see like a fractal. What would be if you like saw through the fractal, right? Like that's the thing that we are studying. That's what Zazen is. You know, and in fact, that's what life is. We're seeing through the fractal all the time. What is it to wake up to that seeing through the fractal? The map, the picture of the fractal, that could be very helpful to give you a different sense about how things are. Because you have a sense that things just are what they are, and they hang out, and they're just here, you know. And then fractal tells you, oh, well, maybe not exactly. And so that's very helpful. But then you have to go beyond that. You have to say, no, the intimacy is not present in the kind of abstraction of the map, but the map also gives me a different way of seeing. And so it is also true, and it's not apart from the fractal itself. So this brings us to Zen Master Kotetsu. I think when we get to this point, the koan is self-explanatory. But I will say just a few things about it because I think it's so beautiful. This is one of the few. I remember when I first. Never. We'll see. So stay on track. Zen Master Kotetsu of Mount Mayoku. He's using a fan. So you just imagine. I think whenever I read this, I kind of see. I loved Kung Fu theater when I was a kid, and there's like the Kung Fu theater. That's what it kind of appears to be in my mind. It's like there's like he's using the fan, and the monk comes up, and it's that's the quality of it for me, which is a favorable. And so he comes up and he asks him this question. So why are you using a fan? The nature of wind is ever present and permeates it. If all these things we've been talking about, if the very foundation of consciousness is intimacy, total interpenetration, if every dharma, regardless of any sense of its awakening, is in its dharma position and is completely and totally interpenetrating with everything else, then why do anything? Much less why do anything that would try to reveal this wind, if the wind is just everywhere to begin with. Another way to say that is if we're completely endowed with Buddha nature, then what would be the point of practice? Which was Dogen's original deep quandary. He grew up in a time where the teaching of original enlightenment was very, very, very strong. And it was imbalanced in its strength. And so it was used as a kind of crutch to say, well, you know, we're all intrinsically enlightened, so, and then follow it by whatever it is that you happen to want to do in that moment, and then just call that original enlightenment. So that kind of shaky theology, we use that word lightly, was very, very strong. And but he had grown up in that environment. It's easy for us to see now what some of the mistakes of it are. But at that time, it was so pervasive. It was just the way that people were seeing the world. And Dogen was really thrown into this great, as a young monk, he was really thrown into this great conundrum. He was like, but all the ancestors practiced so hard. What's going on? And he went from teacher to teacher and asked them that, and he couldn't get any satisfactory answers within the Tendai school, which was the dominant school he belonged to. And so he left the Tendai school, and he went to study with Eisai, who was the first Zen teacher in Japan. And that's where his journey in Zen practice began. So this is not like a new question for Dogen. There's a reason this shows up. This was like his central question, and most of us have that. We'll have a central karma. We'll have a central thing which you will chew on over and over and over again. And you think you're chewing on something new, and then you'll kind of realize, like, oh man, this is the same dog biscuit. It's been up for a long time. It must be one of those. When my friend get those like rawhide bones for his dog, and his dog can just like chew on it forever. But that's kind of how we do it. So I don't know what your rawhide bone is, but for Dogen, it was definitely this. And so that shows up as the question of this quote. So the master answers, he says, "Oh, you know that the wind's nature is ever present. You don't know that it permeates everywhere." So it's an interesting answer, right? He says, "Yeah, you get it, that this is everywhere. But what's its permeating? What does it mean for it to permeate? That's not an abstract thing. It's not like we look back and we go, oh, see, it's permeating everywhere. Because it's permeating through here too, right? That's not a view. It's permeating is not a view. And it's not something I can view independently. I can't independently view. Whatever I do of viewing is also its permeation. Whatever seeing I'm doing is also its seeing. It is that wind moving through me. And so, he challenges the monk there. He says, well, okay, you don't quite get it. And the monk says, how does the wind permeate? And of course, the master just continues using it. And then the bows deep. There's some interesting commentary on this. Oftentimes there's a couple of lines on it. But in this formulation, it's thought that Dogen maybe had dropped those last lines, perhaps because he wanted to show a favorable side of the monk, that the monk's bowing was his expression of the complete function, was his expression of fanning. He got it. He was like, oh, yeah, I got to keep fanning. My fanning is back. I'm in the position of a student. You're in the position of a teacher. So I bow. And I learned something from him. And that's the continuing fanning. In the other versions, he says something kind of critical of the monk. So I think some of the commentators think that might be why he dropped it here. Although in the final paragraph, he does say something. Well, he's not directed at the monk so much, but he says the genuine experience of Buddha Dharma enlightenment and the vital path that has been correctly transmitted is like this: to say we should not use a fan because the nature of wind is ever present, and that we should feel the wind even when we don't use a fan, is to know neither ever presence nor the wind's nature. So he takes it both the way there, right? He says you don't know either one. Since the wind's nature is ever present, the wind of the Buddhist family enables us to realize the goal of the greater, to transform the lumber into. So if this wind's nature is ever present, then the wind of the Buddhist family can do something. So here, the wind of the Buddhist family, this is a kind of traditional expression. The wind of, like you'll hear people say, the wind of a mountain. Like the first time I went to visit Itabashi Zenji's monastery, I was just going for a short stay, and so I had to write a letter to ask if I could come. And my brother was teaching me how to write the letter, and so he taught me this phrase that was like, "I wish to encounter the fragrance of your mountain wind." That's a very poetic way to say, but that's what you would you say. Like, I want to visit, check you out. I want to see if this. I want to size you up. It's like I want to sample the fragrance of your mountain. So that wind becomes the idea is that it's something. It is the movement of the awakening. It's a movement of the. And so the wind of the Buddhist family would be all of the Buddhist family would be all of the beings who are practicing this practice of awakening, whether they're called Buddhist or not. And that because the wind is ever present, that we can use a fan. We can practice. And this could get really trippy when you think about it this way or that. If you think about it like with Christian theology, is it like grace or good works? This shows up in all kinds of different places. But I think there's one just like really simple thing that you can do. It's be like, we're free to practice. Like, it's not just practice as something that we have to do to get free. It's like there is a total freedom in our consciousness, in our being, in our aliveness, which we don't have to wait even a moment to manifest. In fact, we're manifesting it all the time. And so practice doesn't have to be about just getting somewhere that's different than where you are. Taking right here as your place, taking right here as your path is possible because the wind blows right through here. And then you participate in the wind. If the wind's everywhere, why would your body not also produce wind? Or break wind. I couldn't resist. And this is the realization that's the goal of the Great Earth. And I'll just say this about the Great Earth. Great Earth usually is, it shows up in different ways in terms of a symbol, but goes all the way back to the Buddha's awakening, where his exclamation, I, the Great Earth, and all beings attain to the way at the same time. When we talk about the Great Earth, usually it's a reference of everything. Everything in a completely embodied way. Not the idea of everythingness, but the actuality of everythingness which you meet in the tangible world of physical, mental, emotional, spiritual objects. That is gold. It's not just that you turn it into gold, or that part of it's gold, or you get the gold out of it, but the everything of it is the gold. The Awakening of Faith in the Mahayana, the great text by Ashwagandha, starts out by saying that the great vehicle, the Mahayana, is the mind of all sentient beings. It's not in the mind of all sentient beings. It's not possible in all different kinds of minds and beings. It's the great vehicle is the mind of sentient beings. The gold of the Great Earth. The Great Earth is gold. And there can be, through that, this transformation of the long into green. And I think, Sarah, you had brought that up to me. I went back to find the commentaries to find out what the original thing was. I couldn't find it. I read it somewhere, but then I couldn't find it. Sarah had brought up, she was like, I don't think they did a whole lot of milk in Japan. What's he talking about? Or in China, for that matter, at this time. Now people, oh my God, they make the kids choke it down just like all around the world. And it's like, but anyway, there was some classical image about cream and things turning into cream, and I'd read about it, and I don't remember the particulars. I couldn't find it. So anyway, if anyone finds that, let me know. I read it was something about maybe the word cream isn't quite right. That maybe it was ghee, or maybe it was something else. It was quite a clever investigation. But
I've heard some translations say cheese.
Cheese. Yeah. That doesn't sound so good, but ooh, how about this? If you could, it transforms the Long River into brie. Because cheese could be like cheddar, which I like, but it doesn't have quite the same. Okay, well, that's all I got. And again, this was a little bit of an experiment. I used to teach a lot of classes on Dogen, and then they would go on for a really long time. And then what I figured out usually about the fifth class in is nobody was studying outside of the class except for me. And so, which was okay, kind of. But then I got kind of bent out of shape about it. So then didn't lecture for a long time. And we did some other things which were really fun, which we've been talking about bringing back, like a Dharma seminar, where you're doing more writing and bringing it and discussing it with other people and things like that. But for this time I just really wanted to just lecture and not have a lot of discussion, just kind of share with you what my musings were about something. So, think about how it was useful or not useful. Someone from the practice committee might do a survey or just ask people informally about what, how it was helpful to them. And, plan things into the future. But I certainly enjoyed myself. And I really do love this material. And I just encourage you that one of the things about it in the early stages, when you're in the early stages of encountering, it can just seem so what's that word you can't see through something?
Opaque.
Opaque. Yeah, it's just like so opaque. And you're just like, and then you hear someone talk about it and just like saying it. But just like that image I brought up with you, just stay with it. Things come out that start becoming really meaningful to you. And I think it's a little like time release NyQuil. It's good, like you don't want all the medicine at once. The time release is important, so that it's built into that. Like you don't just take everything at once. Don't be in too big of a hurry to understand. That's a not so helpful. To be content with what you do see, and then the contentment also leads you to an interest as opposed to a grasping for further understanding. That's really good pacing. And the stuff that seems really opaque in a way helps us to realize that kind of pacing. And I'm just saying stuff.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.